Hi, this is Charlie Warren, editor of Amateur Astronomy Magazine, and welcome to our tutorial. This tutorial is intended as a supplement to the article that I wrote in spring of 2014. It is entitled Photoshop Layer Mask, Getting the Most Out of Your Astronomical Data. I'll be doing this on a PC running Photoshop CS6. If you have an earlier version of Photoshop, it should work the same. Some of the palettes may look a little bit different. If you're using a Mac instead of a PC, simply alternate a couple of keys. When I say Control, use your Command key. When I use the Alt key, you just use your Option key. Everything else should work exactly the same. So let's get started. Okay, in this tutorial, what I want to do is combine two different data sets that I've acquired for the M42 Nebula Complex. Now my assumption is in this tutorial that these two data sets have already been aligned. So I've got one which is a set of 20-second exposures of the Orion Nebula. Expand that full screen. And as you can see, there's a lot of dark out here, but I got nice detail on the core. My second set of data is very nice outer regions of nebulosity, but I've got a lot of data that's blown out in the center here. So if I take a look at the levels, again, if you hit Control L, it'll bring up your level screen. You can see that it's clipped here in the bright areas. And if we look at my other data set and look at our levels, you can see it's clipped down here. My purpose is to create a layer mask which is going to optimize that and give me the best of both worlds. So to begin with, what I need to do is stack the one exposure on the other. There's several ways to do that. You can left click and drag by selecting the Move tool, which is up here in the top, the icon on the top, or if you want, you can just click the V on the keyboard, which will select it, and left click and drag it into the exposure. If you hold down the Shift key, it will automatically align it. But probably an even easier way to do that is to just do a full selection. So a Control A selects this entire exposure, a Control C, which will copy it to the clipboard, then click over to my other exposure and do a Control V, which is a paste, and it pastes it on top, as you can see over here, as a new layer. And by clicking the eyeball on and off, I can look at each layer, and it's pretty clear to see which one of these has the benefit in which areas. So what I want to do here is create a layer mask, and a mask is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to mask certain areas, reveal certain areas. And a mask in Photoshop, you can have two different types you start with, a reveal all mask or conceal all mask. The reveal all mask will be white. White will expose everything. Black will conceal everything. Gray will expose different portions depending on the shade of gray. So there's a couple ways we can do that. First one is we go up into the layer menu here, and we go down to layer mask, and as you can see, I got two options. We're going to do a hide all, so we're going to hide the entire top portion. As you can see, it does hide it, and the only thing that's showing is the bottom portion. I'm going to show you one other means of doing that same thing, so you can use this menu at the bottom here. So I'm going to drag this mask now down to the trash can, get rid of it. There we go. And we're going to create this mask now by clicking on the mask icon, which is right down here in the bottom. You see I'm circling it with the mouse. If I click on it, it's going to create a white or reveal all mask. I get rid of that now. But what I want is a black conceal all mask. So what I do is hold down my Alt key and click on it again, and you can see I have a conceal all mask and move back where we started. So now what I want to do is expose part of this top short exposure, the 20-second exposure, so that I can fill in some detail in here. And probably the simplest way, I'm going to cover three different ways of creating this mask. The first one is the simplest method, which is to select the brush tool. You can do that by pressing the B key, and you see it selected the brush, or you can left click on this icon over here. Either way will select the brush. Now we've got a black mask, and you can see it's selected by left clicking on it. And I want to paint with white, which is what we currently have over here. You can see this is the foreground color, which is what I'll be painting with. If I wanted to turn around and mask out some areas, which I may later, I can reverse that by clicking or just hitting the X key on the keyboard, and you can see that every time I hit X it toggles it back and forth. So we have white. We're going to start painting with white. And the brush we want a rather large brush, and we want it to be soft, which is what's already selected. So we got this nice big soft brush. And I want to make sure my opacity is somewhere between, say, about 25 to 30%, so we can gradually paint this in so it's not too drastic a transition. So to start painting, again, I want to make sure my mask is selected, so left click on it. And I can go out here with the brush and just start painting the areas in the actual image that I want to be exposed. And so we just paint over these areas that are kind of blown out. Bring back some detail there. And don't worry, you can get a little messy because we can either paint back over it with black, or we can lower the entire opacity layer, which we'll do in a minute. So let me paint in a little bit more, and it takes a little bit for it to catch up. And there we go. So let's see what we have. If we click off the layer, we can see we're back where we started, and this is the detail that we painted in. Now if you want to take a look at the mask we created and find out what it looks like, you Alt click on it. If you click on it, it selects the layer, but you can't see what it is. If you hold down the Alt key and click on it, it will show you what the mask looks like. The gray areas are going to be a partial transition, which give a feathering effect, and the black is going to conceal everything else. So looking back at our image, not bad. It was fairly quick. We can tune it up a lot, as I mentioned. If we wanted to, like this area might be a little dark, all we need to do is paint back with black, and again you can toggle back and forth, but black is currently selected. Now if I want to make sure my mask is selected again, otherwise I'll paint over my original data, and you can paint it back in like that. And there we go. So you can lighten it up, you can go back and forth, paint it in, paint out, detail. By the way, something I neglected to do earlier, I'm going to do right now, is I'm going to save this under another file name so I don't accidentally save over my original data, and I'm going to call this Orion Nebula, and how about stacked. So this is going to be my stacked image set. It's going to save it as a Photoshop PSD file so that we can save it with all the layers. Save, and really best to do that as soon as you get started, but make sure you do it at least before you start saving. So there's our first method, and again I can clean that up a lot and tune it up and fine-tune some of these areas in between. Let's take a look at my second means of doing this. I'm going to drop that down into the trash can again, and this time we're going to select the data with one of the selection tools. Now I can use any one of these I want. I can use the lasso tool, and if you can either select it by left clicking up here or type the L, which will select the lasso, and I can just go around like this and kind of select these regions roughly that I want to be part of my layer mask. If I want to add a separate region with the lasso, I hold down the shift key and I can add in a little bit more data over here. And that's one way to do it. The other method I can use is using this tool up here, the quick selection tool, and all you do is repeatedly click and it will keep adding to the selection until we get what we want. And with this method we want to oversample a little bit. Either way, it depends what you're comfortable with, but make sure you click all the different areas. And in this one, let's get a little bit of this over there. And that gives us a rough selection. Now in Photoshop, once you have a selection made, if you now click on your layer mask, it's going to float that selection to my layer mask. So when I click down here, watch what happens. First it makes it pretty ugly, and we'll work on that in a minute. But I'm going to alt-click on my mask and we can take a look at what it created. Okay. And first thing you notice is it's just black and white. So there's no feathering, which is one of the reason that it looks so harsh in the original image back here. So what we want to do is feather this out a bit. And one of the easiest ways to do that is just to use a filter. Go up to Blur, the filter menu, then to Blur, and down to Gaussian Blur. And we want to put in a pretty aggressive, we really want to feather this pretty well. So I put in about, say, 41 pixels, which is a pretty aggressive Gaussian blur. But let's see what that does, and click on my image again, and as you can see, that's much more acceptable. So pretty quickly we selected the area that we want to show through. We applied a Gaussian blur to the mask, and in short order we have something that's pretty acceptable. It's probably a little bit strong, and one of the other ways we can mellow that effect out is to go over here to the opacity, and I can either use the drop down and select it with a slider, or you can left click and drag on the opacity right here, which is an easy way to do it, to fine tune till you get it how you like it. And somewhere around there it looks fairly natural, but as you can see I've got lots of detail in there. Well, there's one third method I would like to show you to create a selection, and it's usually the method that I use for most objects like this, because the data itself can help you select what you need. So let me drop this back down into the garbage can, get rid of that layer. I'm going to start fresh again. This time what I'd like to do is use the brighter data set. I'm going to click off this top layer so I can view it. I'm going to use this data set to create my mask. So I want to do a Control A to select and a Control C to copy. I'm going to go back up to my top layer here, and with it active I'm going to click on the layer mask to add a layer mask, and now we're going to alt click on it. You can see our white screen, and I'm going to paste that image from the clipboard on there. So as you can see, it's a copy of the bottom image that we actually have in there for the mask. Now the reason this is so intuitive is the fact that the brightest portions that are blown out are white, and so they're going to reveal exactly what I want. That's the part that I want. And in this area is a grayscale, so it'll pass part of the data. The only fly in the ointment, so to speak, is we got this gray out here that's going to pass part of the data through from this 20-second exposure, and there's not really much data out there. So it's a good starting place, but I still have to modify this. So let's go back and we'll take a look. We're in this mask. As you can see, it's selected. And the first thing I want to do is clip this data intentionally. So I'm going to bring up my levels menu, and I'm going to push the black point until we shrink that way down. So I want to get rid of all those outer areas where there's no data in this short data set anyway. I'm probably not going to mess with the white too much. I'm going to bring the mid-tone in there and blow that out a little bit. I may push it a little more severely. And my idea again is to eliminate these outer areas. Again, this is a mask where I don't have data, and focus on here. I'm going to do one more thing, although I'll show you what this looks like. It's going to look a little ugly until we do the next step. As you can see, I've got my definition in here, but there's a lot of just murky stuff, and it does not look like we made much progress on this. So this next step is what's going to turn this into something that's workable, and we're going to do the same thing we did in the previous step. I'm going to add a feathered transition for this, so I'm going to go down to my filter menu to blur, and going to add a Gaussian blur, and not quite as aggressive as the last one. I'm going to drop it down, well, say about 27, 28, somewhere in there. And that should be a good starting point. Now we may want to modify it, but let's take a look. And actually that's not too bad. If you notice, I'm going to click this on and off. I'm gaining an awful lot of detail in this inner region, but if you notice the outer region, I'm not losing anything at all. And as a matter of fact, I'm even shrinking some of these stars a little bit, but I got to watch out, make sure I don't create a halo, which I have a little bit of a, well, not too much, but it can form a little bit of a halo. What I'll probably do, again, I can play with the opacity. That looks a little bit extreme to me, and this is where it will be subjective depending on your tastes, but I'm going to drop that opacity down somewhere around there, and that looks pretty good to me. Now again, at this point I can do a lot more tweaking. As a matter of fact, I can use the previous methods. I can use the paintbrush to paint in or out more detail in different areas. I can use the lasso tool again to do that and feather it. But at this point I'm going to leave it right like this and just let you know you can do a lot more tweaking from here. Now one more thing that I want to show you, and it's a pretty neat little trick. What I would like to do is combine all this and flatten it into one layer. Now one way to do that is simply to flatten the image and then save it under a different file name. But if you haven't used this trick, you may find it pretty handy, and it takes a little bit of dexterity, but do a Control-Alt-Shift and push the E key, and if you notice, what it does is it floats a selection, a flattened selection, up to its own layer up here. So pretty cool. And again, this just has 2 layers beneath it, but sometimes working with Photoshop you can have 6, 7, 8, and then you want to see your final results all combined and flattened. Sometimes you want to manipulate the data in that way, but that's one way to do it. Now another neat trick, if you haven't discovered this, is you can view just any one of the layers and turn off the rest. And again, it's pretty easy just to click them off because we've only got 3, but sometimes we'll be working with, and in future tutorials I will show you some where we'll have stacks of 5, 6, 7 layers. The easy way to do this is hold down the Alt key, click on the eye icon, and you can see the other ones go off. And to get it back, I just Alt click on the eye again. Now that works on any one of the layers, so any layer that I want to see all by itself, I just Alt click on it. Again, just a handy little shortcut. If you haven't discovered this before, neat way to do it without having to click off every one of the eyes. So now let me go to this top layer. The purpose of this whole thing to begin with, before I started chasing the rabbit, is to add a little bit more contrast to this. So I'm going to go and bring up my levels. Control L will bring up my levels. And as you can see from the histogram here, I've got some space to work with at the bottom here. Now I don't want to clip it, but I'm going to darken it up a little bit. I'm not going to move the white point. I don't want to blow out or bloat those stars, but I may work a little bit with the mid-tones just to push it a little bit. Brighten that up. And again, adding a little contrast without clipping the data. Now if I want to refine this even more, I would probably use the curves at this point. But I just added, the idea was just to add a little bit more contrast, darken that sky up, add a little contrast to the back nebulosity. Again, this deserves more time spent in bringing out this faint nebulosity here, but for this tutorial I just wanted to give you an idea of what it looked like. So there we have it. We have 3 different methods to create a layer mask, to combine a short exposure with a longer exposure to maximize the data and detail. And at this point the only thing left to do would be to flatten the image and go back and add that to our color data, which I've done. But in a fairly short period of time we were able to dramatically improve the way our image look. So my last step is to flatten all of this data, save it as a luminance layer, and add in my red, green, blue, or in this case I used HA, so I combined the HA red, green, blue. Now I did that and I will follow up in a separate tutorial. I did that using clipping masks as far as combining the data, but I'll show you the final result with the color added back in. And as you can clearly see, there's a lot more detail in both the Running Man and the Orion Nebula at the core there than there was with the beginning long exposure. And of course the short exposure was missing tons of data on the outskirts. So there you have it. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and it will help you combine a short and a long data set, and obviously there's some other applications you can use it for as well. Well, that's it for now, but we've got lots of great content to come. If you're not a current subscriber, please consider joining us. You can subscribe by logging directly on our website at amateurastronomy.com or give us a call in the office at 615-332-5555. We'd be happy to process your order over the phone. Well, until next time, we wish you clear, dark skies.